Hopefully, you've already seen the video over on my personal channel that gives an overview of the 28 billion in grants awarded to states by the Federal Railroad Administration under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. If you haven't seen it, there's a link in my description down there somewhere. With a mere 12.5 million in grants, Utah was almost at the bottom of the list of states, and I estimate that Utah could have received an additional 100 million in grants had we just been better organized and actually applied for them. So, as executive director of the Utah Rail Passengers Association, I'd like to share my perspective on how Utah could take better advantage of federal funding opportunities while also doing a better job planning for the future of both passenger and freight rail in Utah. My deep dive into this 28 billion in funding started after having read an article by Katie McKellar of the Utah News Dispatch titled Air Taxis, Delivery Drones. Utah sets out to build advanced air mobility system by 2034. The article explained that this year, more than 3 million in state funding has been set aside to advance Utah's air mobility goals. Having crossed paths with Katie multiple times through the year, I sent her an email to express the following concerns. While it's critical to keep up on emerging technologies, it is extremely frustrating to see the legislature continually neglect other modes like rail. I've had colleagues from the Federal Railroad Administration express concern about how Utah is failing to plan for the future and is rapidly falling behind other states. Basically, Utah isn't the worst state in the nation for planning for future rail needs, but we are far behind where a state of 3.5 million with the fastest growth rate between 2010 and 2020 needs to be. The lack of planning is being noted at the federal level, and it's hurting our ability to pursue federal funding for rail projects. Katie replied back, I would be interested in pursuing info showing how Utah is falling behind other states when it comes to rail. Is there a resource you could point to that illustrates where Utah falls compared to other states? Maybe a report. Initially, I couldn't think of any quantitative data that backs up the concerns I had expressed. But then, just a few minutes later, it dawned on me that I could total up the 28 billion in grant awards, and then the world would know not only how Utah performed, but all 50 states and the District of Columbia. Unfortunately, this data was not already compiled into a spreadsheet and rather was listed in a half dozen or so PDFs. So I spent 2 days copying the almost 500 individual awards from the PDFs and pasting everything into a spreadsheet so the data could be easily analyzed. Hooray for pivot tables. I expected Utah to be in the bottom 10 of the list, but I was honestly blown away when Utah came out next to last. Let's take a look at the 3 awards that Utah was able to get, since they are great examples of the kind of awards that Utah could have gotten more of. On June 5th, 2020, the city of Bluffdale was awarded $3.2 million through the Railroad Crossing Elimination Grant Program for the Bluffdale Pedestrian Overpass project. The project description reads, the proposed project will support project development, final design, right-of-way acquisition, and construction activities to close a private at-grade crossing and build a non-motorized ADA-compliant overpass over Union Pacific's rail line, which also hosts BNSF freight trains and Frontrunner commuter rail service. The project will eliminate the need for residents to use a 2.5-mile detour to access schools and neighborhoods. The city of Bluffdale will contribute 20% non-federal match. The private at-grade crossing reference here lies in Bluffdale between 146th South and Porter Rockwell Boulevard, along Union Pacific's Provo subdivision and the Utah Transit Authority's Frontrunner line. The area has experienced a lot of growth recently, so adding a pedestrian and bicycle overpass will be super useful for the neighborhoods on either side of the tracks. On October 29th, 2024, the Utah Department of Transportation was awarded $1.8 million through the Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements Program, also known as CRISI, for the State Route 39 grade separation project. The project description reads, The proposed project was selected for project development and includes activities to grade separate one at-grade crossing over State Route 39 in Ogden, Utah. The project aligns with selection criteria to improve safety by eliminating a potential conflict point for trains and vehicles, creating a more efficient transportation network by eliminating stop and wait time for vehicle traffic, and improving travel time for both rail freight and vehicles by eliminating an at-grade crossing and the consequent delay. The Utah Department of Transportation will contribute the 20% non-federal match. State Route 39 is 12th Street in Ogden, and I'm only aware of one railroad crossing along that highway, which is where it crosses Union Pacific's Ogden subdivision, which runs north from Ogden to Brigham City. On January 10th, 2025, the Utah Department of Transportation was awarded $7.5 million through the Railroad Crossing Elimination Grant Program for the Provo Subdivision Rail Consolidation. The project description reads, the proposed project was selected for project development and includes activities to consolidate two adjacent rail corridors owned by Union Pacific and Utah Railways into a single corridor in Utah County, Utah. The project will remove 19 grade crossings, abandon 7 miles of track through Spanish Fork and Springville, Utah, and improve 10 additional crossings on the new consolidated corridor. The project aligns with selection criteria by enhancing safety as the project will remove rail crossings, create a more efficient transportation network, and improve travel times for both rail and vehicles. The Utah Department of Transportation will contribute the 20% non-federal match. This project would consolidate the two adjacent corridors of Union Pacific's Provo subdivision running through Springville and Spanish Fork into one corridor. The westernmost track would be removed and consolidated into the easternmost track corridor. So that's a brief overview of the three grants comprising the $12.5 million that Utah was awarded. At the start of this video, I said that I estimate that Utah could have reasonably received an additional $100 million in funding through these programs. My reasoning is based on the fact that Utah is the number 30 state in population. The 2020 census also revealed that Utah was the fastest growing state in the nation between 2010 and 2020. While the U.S. as a whole grew 7.7% during that decade, Utah grew 21.8%, which is almost 3 times the national growth rate. So it would make sense that Utah should be somewhere around number 30 on the list of awards based just on our population. But given our growth rate, we should probably be more aggressive at seeking funding opportunities and trying to be as high as number 25 or maybe even number 20 on the list. When we look over the list of states ranked by awards, being somewhere between 20 and 25 on the list would equate to an additional $100 million. Reasonably, we could have received a lot more grants for projects like grade crossing eliminations. However, we just haven't been prepared for the opportunities. The problem is that we lack a vision of what both passenger rail and freight rail need to become to support the needs of the nation's fastest growing state. We also lack any kind of substantial strategy for the future of rail in Utah. As an example, I point to our now 10 years old state rail plan, which was completed in April 2015. This 220-page document gave a great overview of the state of our rail system at the time. While it would have made for a great Wikipedia article, it lacked vision and strategy 10 years ago and is now in desperate need of being replaced by an up-to-date state rail plan. One problem for Utah is UDOT itself. UDOT's current concern for railroads is almost entirely where railroads intersect highways. There is little concern by UDOT for improvements that would increase both freight and passenger capacity, despite the fact that there's overwhelming evidence that it requires far less of a subsidy to move both goods and people by rail rather than highways. The bottom line is that investing in rail would save Utah money in the future. The problem is that I just don't see the current leadership of UDOT as having the capacity or even the appetite for doing the kind of planning and making the kind of investments in rail that Utah's future needs. Either UDOT needs to change or the Utah legislature needs to create something like maybe a Department of Railroads to have oversight over the future of railroads in Utah. And that's a step that some states have already taken while others are actively considering. One thing that the Utah Rail Passengers Association is trying to do is to host a Utah Rail Summit. Over the past 3 years, I have attended the Greater Northwest Rail Summit, which has been held in Billings, Boise, and Spokane, and will be held again this fall in Portland. Each year, I was one of the few people in attendance from Utah. Noticeably absent each year was anyone from UDOT, despite other states being amply represented by their state DOTs. So I've concluded that the best way to fill this lack of attendance would be to hold a summit in our own backyard, one that UDOT would be unable to ignore. Following the format of the Greater Northwest Rail Summit, the Utah Rail Summit would include speakers and panels featuring national leaders on both passenger rail and freight rail, and give stakeholders in Utah the opportunity to learn about what other states are doing and how Utah could follow their examples. But the Utah Rail Passengers Association needs funding in order to make the Utah Rail Summit happen. If you've got funding and would like to help support this effort, let me know. Thanks again for watching. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or suggestions. As I mentioned earlier, I've made a separate video on my personal channel that gives an overview of all the Federal Railroad Administration grants under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. The link is in the description if you haven't seen it yet. Also, I'm thinking of making more videos like this. Let me know what other topics you'd be interested in, and I'm probably going to throw some bloopers in at the end just for fun. Thanks. Recording in progress. Once again, I am talking to a camera like an idiot. There's a late. Ugh. Okay. Let's start from the top. $8 billion. Why is this so hard? Okay. Intro slide. 3.5 million with the fastest. Ugh. With the fastest. Okay. Basically, Utah isn't the first. Okay. 2020 needs to be. Okay. So I spent 2 days copying the almost 500 individual. Hooray for pivot tables. Okay. Elimination grant program for the Bluffdale pedestrian overpass. Bluffdale pedestrian overpass. Yeah. Okay. And improving traffic time. Okay. The project, I am once again talking to the camera. A 7.5 million. Yeah, just read what's on the screen. It's not that hard, Mike. This project would consolidate the two adjacent corridors of the. Okay. My reasoning is based on the fact that Utah is the number 30 state. Okay. But given how our growth rate, okay, just like, okay. However, we just haven't prepared. Okay. Starting over again. The problem is that we lack a vision of both. Okay. Problem is we lack a. This 220-page document gave a great overview. While it would have made for a great and is now in desperate need of being replaced by an up-to-date still. Well, it would have made for a one problem for Utah. Okay. So following the the link is in the description. Okay. Okay, almost done here. Thanks.